Hey, my name is Chris Brennan, and you're listening to the Astrology Podcast. In this episode, I'm going to be talking with a group of patrons about their birth charts, and we're going to review some of the recent transits of Venus retrograde, Mars retrograde, and the eclipse season that we just got out of last month to talk about how some of these transits have showed up in different people's lives and what sort of things they've coincided with based on where those transits fell in different people's birth charts. I've talked extensively about the Venus retrograde over the past few months and how that started in Aries at the beginning of March and then retrograded back to Pisces. And it's actually stationing direct today because we're recording this on Saturday, April 12th, 2025, starting at 3:48 p.m. in Denver, Colorado. So today is officially the day of Venus technically ending its retrograde station, which is its 40 days of backwards movement through the signs of the zodiac. We're still going to have a ways to go before Venus leaves its post retrograde shadow and departs from Pisces, and then eventually passes the shadow degree at 10 degrees of Aries next month, I believe, in either in late April or early May, and then eventually departs from Aries for the final time, I think in like early June. So some of the things with the retrograde are still going to be wrapping up, but it's still a good time since we're on the day of Venus's actual station to actually check in because I think most people should already see and have experienced some of the main themes that this transit's all about at this point, and they should be able to talk about how that's been impacting their life in different ways. Additionally, same thing with the Mars retrograde. So Mars first went into Cancer last September, and that was when it entered into the sign that it would later retrograde back to. Then it stationed retrograde in early Leo in December, retrograded back into Cancer in early January, and then eventually stationed direct in later in February. But Mars is still moving so slow that it's still in the later degrees of Cancer at this point, still picking up steam and trying to make its way out of that sign. So Mars is going to go into late Leo later this month in April, and it's not going to finish its transit and its post-retrograde shadow effectively until I think again in June. So we still have a ways to go in wrapping up this Mars retrograde transit, but some of the most important themes should have already become very clear in everybody's lives. So I think it's something we'll be able to talk about with people and get a sense for how that transit worked out, especially the Cancer portion of it that's been just like sitting in that sign for the past few months in the very beginning part of this year, the first quarter of this year, essentially. And then the last thing was the eclipse season, where we had a lunar eclipse in Virgo in the middle of March, and then we had a solar eclipse in Aries towards the end of March. And we just finally got out of eclipse season, and today is actually the first lunation since the last eclipse, which really fully takes us out of the eclipse season time frame, because we're having a full moon today in Libra that is not an eclipse. So eclipses I always associate with major beginnings and major endings. So I'm curious to hear how that worked out in different people's lives. And in some instances, we may just focus on like one transit and how that manifested in a person's life in a particularly obvious or, as I always say, like striking way. But in other instances, we might see how all three of those, broadly speaking, transits uh, activated different parts of a person's life all at the same time in a way that was like interconnected or indicating the activation of those topics or those parts of the chart um, sort of in parallel. All right, so why don't we just jump into it and I'll see how many charts I can get through today. We were going to start with Kelly, I believe. Hey,
Hello. Nice to
thanks for
meet you.
joining me.
Thank you.
All right, what's your birth data?
9/21/1962, 5:20 p.m. Durand, Durand, Michigan.
Let me see if this calculates correctly. Is your ascendant 27 Aquarius?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. So I'll share your chart and I'll just briefly describe some of the main points for those listening to the audio version. So you have Aquarius rising, you have a day chart with the sun in a Virgo, and you have Jupiter in Pisces, which is your most positive planet in the second house. And then you have Mars in Cancer, conjunct the moon in the sixth house. So you natally have Mars in Cancer, and um, that was that was part of your description that you sent in, as you said that there were some issues with like somebody that works for you
Sure.
because the shortly after Mars went into your sixth house, and that was the primary thing about your example, right?
Right.
Okay, so set that up for us. Like what happened starting last fall?
Right. So it started, October 1st was the last day for my key employee that I've worked with for 10 years. Um, and I found out like the day before the lunar eclipse actually in September that um that's like when he gave us 2 weeks notice.
Okay,
And he does my first thought was not that I knew that I would miss him and but I was happy for him, but sad for me because he did everything possible to keep my job stress-free, to keep me from having to do more work than I needed to. So it was a big loss.
okay. That makes sense. So yeah, the sixth house
Mhm.
is traditionally the house that's associated with like employees or people that work for you. And
Right,
sometimes when you have a transit like that of like Mars through the sixth house, it can indicate like a severing or a separation with somebody that works for you. So in this instance, it wasn't like a acrimonious split or something like that, but it was something that, as a result of that separation, it created additional stress and work for
right,
you subsequently for a while after that.
correct. And I'm also having a third house perfection year. So that's Aries. And then so Mars is the ruler, and that
Got
all
it.
happened at the same time.
Right. So you actually switched into that around the same time of that eclipse in September. You switched into an Aries perfection year, making
Right,
Mars the Lord of the Year and making it that transit even more important.
exactly.
So because Mars went in at the beginning of September and then it was there through September and October.
Mhm.
Um, how long had you worked with this like employee?
For over like 10 years,
Oh wow, okay. So that's
over
a
10
long
years,
time.
maybe actually about 14 probably. Yeah, that's a long time. Like he could read my mind. Like we worked really well together. It was devastating.
Yeah. Um, and then when he left in October, at the beginning of
Mhm.
October, could you describe what happened subsequent to that in terms of how it complicated things for you at work?
Sure. So an employee like that takes a little bit to replace and to train. Even if somebody comes in with a lot of experience, there's still needing to have the knowledge of the business that we're in. And so it's not somebody you can just replace next Tuesday and expect them to be, up to speed. So um, I actually ended up I had to I made offers to a couple different people and things just fell through with either them getting another job offer at the same time or their employer wanting to keep them. So it actually took 3 offers before I actually got somebody put into place.
Oh wow. Okay. And
Yeah.
when was that roughly?
Um, let's see. It was in October 16th, 17th, around that area. Uh,
Okay.
I think, or was it November? I'm sorry, I didn't write that down.
So, and you got somebody new in place and then has that
Yeah.
stayed good or
Yes, yes, it's been very good. Yep,
okay.
yep.
Um, and then that transit by November, it was like that initial Mars transit completed. Because Mars, let me share the chart actually. So here's the bi-wheel with the transits, and we just see Mars was going through. You actually had your exact Mars return like immediately after that um, initial employee left when you were kind of probably struggling the most.
Yes.
Um, and then Mars departed from your sixth house early in November, and it was gone for a couple of months. So usually there's like an alleviation of some of those tensions. But did any issues in terms of the sixth house come back later on in like January, February, March when Mars went back into your sixth house?
Yes, I did end up just in March, I actually had to write up an employee. So I had to have
Mhm.
that difficult conversation, and the over 30 years that I've worked there, I've never had to write anybody up before.
Oh wow, okay. So this
Uh,
was due to so there were tensions at work, and it looks like
sure.
that would have been shortly after Mars station direct around
Yep.
17 Cancer, and that was like right on top of your natal Mars at like 18 Cancer.
Yes.
Do you so that was creating like friction and tension at work?
Oh, yes.
How would you describe it besides those two words?
Um, Maybe a lot of drama.
Okay,
So, nobody wants to be written up, so it doesn't make them happy and they get defensive. But I try to use it as more of a learning tool and say, this is just something we need to work on and let's just move forward.
got it. Okay. Nice. Well, that seems relatively productive. It seems like you encountered some obstacles and setback and tensions in that area of the sixth house during the course of this Mars retrograde transit, with it activated as the Lord of the Year, but they were kind of like surmountable difficulties that you were able
Sure.
to overcome as a result of just, doing what needed to be done.
Absolutely.
Okay. Do you feel like that's maybe part of the take-home lesson that sometimes maybe that transit was like having to do something that was unpleasant that needed to be done, um, but that by dealing with it sort of like head on, you were able to navigate it successfully?
Yes, I think that was a big lesson that I've learned in probably the last few months is having those difficult conversations that you don't want to have, but when you do, you just get through the other side and you're both on the same page and everybody knows where we are. And, instead of just burying it and let the problem fester and everybody, being upset or not working well together, I think that's made a big difference.
Nice. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah,
Sure.
I mean, one of the things I like about your chart and the way that Mars is situated is it has trines from both of the benefics. It
Sure.
has, on the one hand, with Jupiter and Pisces in your second house, Jupiter's in a sign-based superior trine overcoming Mars and Cancer, which is helping to bonify it or to make it much more positive than it could be otherwise. And then
Mhm.
you've also got this Venus up in Scorpio in the 10th house, which is also moving into a trine with Mars with reception. So it's like, even though Mars is the more challenging planet in your chart because you have a day chart, it's heavily mitigated so that it's almost like some of the best outcomes from that Mars are more possible.
Yeah. I've not thought of that before, so that's a good point.
Nice. All right. So you said you also had like a possible like health thing come up at one point as well?
Yeah, nothing, just some minor things. I ended up having a suspicious mole. I had went to the doctor and had that looked at and ended up having to have that cut out and removed, but it did come back negative, so that part is good. And
Nice. When did that happen roughly?
so I had it cut out on 3/13. Oh, whoops, let's see, I got the wrong date. 3/24.
So March 24th. Okay, so this is Mars still coming off of that station in your sixth house. So if you had it cut out on the 24th, do you know, did they find it very soon before that, or when did they find it?
I think it was the end of January, is because I had to wait several weeks to get back in. It was
Got it.
around January 24th or something like that.
Yeah, so that's all
Okay.
Mars slowing down and stationing. They find it, and then you have to go through this process of like waiting for a month to have it removed.
Yes. And then also during that period, I developed what they call burning mouth syndrome, which
Hmm.
is just uncomfortable and annoying mostly. Just makes you feel like certain parts. I think it has more to do with the nerves in your mouth, and it just feels like it's burning, like maybe you burnt your mouth during like when you had a cup of coffee or something, and so it kind of
Hmm.
leaves it a little raw. But I'm hoping that goes away as soon as Mars goes out of Cancer.
Right.
Because
So
it is getting better.
I've never heard about that before. So what happened?
Either.
When did that happen?
Well, I want to say it was in the middle of probably, let's see, right around the middle of March that I
Oh
first
wow,
kind of
okay.
noticed it, but I didn't really know what it was because I've never heard of it. But
Hmm.
there's some days that it's worse than others, and it just feels like your mouth's on fire, like you had spicy food or something. Um,
Got it. That's actually really
yeah.
uh interesting just because that was like the analogy I kept using over the past year to describe Mars retrograde as I kept
Okay.
talking about because it's like an extended Mars transit through a certain part of your chart. It's like eating a spicy pepper
Okay.
and then the heat like doesn't go away for like a long time. It's something that like sticks with you as opposed to Mars transits normally outside of a retrograde are really fast and just like come and go relatively quickly. But in this instance, you had something where in the middle of March, Mars was really just kind of sitting on top of your natal
Okay.
Mars right there in the sixth house, and then you had this spontaneous like burning sensation in your mouth.
Yes.
Wow, okay. So that's lessened a little bit in the past few weeks since mid-March.
Probably in just like the last week or so.
Okay. So it took a while for it to get like further away from your natal Mars placement. Um,
Mm-hmm.
okay, right. Because you had it wasn't just like hitting your Mars, but then it also squared your Mercury at 21 Libra in
Okay.
the like March 24th time frame. And now that we're in early April, Mars is at the end of Cancer, so you're almost finished with this transit.
Right. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, that's
Yeah.
pretty good.
Yeah.
Um, let's see, there was one last thing. Um,
Oh, was it the
you,
relationship?
yeah, you said there was like one relationship thing that came up.
Yeah, but it was during this Mars period, because Mars was still at 18 degrees Cancer, and it was just I've had this long time friendship with uh, a person, and he and I were, discussing taking it to, more of a dating relationship, and
Hmm.
it's something that I thought that I always really wanted, and after really, and again, had to have that difficult conversation because I realized it really wasn't. It wasn't the right person for me, although I valued the friendship. And so it was a big, like, kind of soul searching kind of a thing, I guess. And,
Hmm.
but then I had to have, or I needed to have for me that conversation to explain to him why I didn't want to just, ghost him or blow him off. So
And what was the time frame on this?
that was actually happened toward the end of January. We ended up having that last conversation on February 9th.
Got it. Okay. Because I was originally curious about this because of the Mars retrograde started out in your seventh house, but that was back in November and
Okay.
December.
Yeah.
Was there any build up with that in terms of obviously it escalated and reached that important
Yeah.
turning point in January and February, but was there anything going on with that in November and December?
Yeah. So, well, probably more in January. We started talking more regularly, probably in December,
Okay.
for that month of December, and started talking about possibly taking the relationship further, but hadn't really acted on it or anything. Just more of a daily conversation at that point.
Got it. Okay. So yeah, but things picked up. I mean, so
Mhm.
Mars slowed down and stationed retrograde at 6 Leo, December 6th, which is your seventh whole sign house. But then,
Right on
um,
the North Node.
yeah, right on your north node at 7 degrees of Leo.
Yeah.
And then by what, late January, Venus is finishing up in Pisces, and then in early February it moves into Aries, which is your perfected sign,
Hmm.
um, which is Aries, your third house, and then gets ready to slow down and station retrograde there. So you made that choice or that decision and had that conversation around when?
February 9th.
February 9th. Okay, got it. So yeah, right after Venus went into Aries, basically. It was only at 3 degrees of Aries at that time.
Yeah.
Um, okay. So was that obviously that was another kind of like difficult conversation to have on some level.
Mhm.
Did that change things going forward at that point in terms of that relationship or what?
Yeah, we haven't had a conversation since then.
Got it. Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah.
But it was a big thing for me because it's kind of, I don't always tell people how I really feel about them
Hmm.
sometimes. Sometimes I hold a lot in. And I felt like it was a big step for me in having that real honest conversation. So we talked about, it
Hmm.
was a good conversation. We talked about a lot of things. So it was good in that sense.
Yeah. It was
But
like
it
a
also helped me to realize like that I was happy with my life the way it was. So
Sure, that makes sense. Yeah, the other thing I'm noticing is that was the day of the Mercury Cazimi, and the Sun and Mercury were conjoined at
oh,
21 degrees of Aquarius on February 9th, right in your first house and not too far from your ascendant. So it was interesting that what you ended up coming to was just kind of like centering on yourself and like what you wanted in terms of your own heart and in terms of your own personal
mhm.
direction in life and everything else, and then having that conversation based on that
Correct. And I'm not so sure that Pluto doesn't have something to do with it all, too, with it,
with
with me trying to think about what I really want and being honest with people about it. And
mm,
so,
with the Pluto in your transit in your first house, or what do you mean?
yeah, yeah,
Sure. Yeah. So maybe is that something you've been going through as a process then more over the past couple of years since Pluto started going into your first,
yes,
is just trying to focus
yeah.
more on your
What do I
own.
want?
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, cool. I think those were like the main things I wanted to ask you about. Oh, right. So the other thing was your sister, and I didn't initially
Oh, correct.
understand how that connected, but you actually had some third house things going on as well.
Yeah. So at the same time, my sister has had to have two different surgeries. Um, she had an Achilles tendon that snapped and she had to have surgery on that. And then shortly after that, she ended up having to have laser surgery on her eye.
When did this happen?
So it was in February when she had the surgery on the Achilles tendon. I'm trying to think, I have the exact date. I think it was toward the beginning of February.
Okay. Yeah, so it's
And
like
then, let's see, go ahead.
it's like you're in a third house perfection year.
Mhm.
Venus has just moved in there, but the biggest thing is just the ruler of the third house is your Mars in Cancer in the sixth, and it's having that Mars return all during this time. And so your sister, with the ruler of the third house of siblings and the sixth house of health, is having some
Mhm.
major like health issues arise at this time.
Yes.
Got it. So do you think both of those things happened in February, or did it go
Yes,
into March?
yes, it was February 4th when she came home from the surgery. I had that. So she would have had it like that day before. And then the laser surgery was March 7th.
Yeah. March 7th. So February 4th was the day Venus moved into Aries, and then March 7th.
Yeah. So my
Got
sister,
it.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Venus being could be a woman figure, right?
Right, with Venus having just stationed retrograde there in your third
Mhm.
house of siblings.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, this is a really good example because it shows like different ways in which all of the different possible archetypes of many of these placements worked
Mhm.
out ever since your your birthday roughly since September when you moved into that third house perfection year. And like, a major theme that has come up throughout has been important conversations that you've had to have with people,
Mhm.
whether the third house being about communication, whether that's like communication with people at work or employees, or whether it's communication about relationships. Another theme has been obviously the workplace itself with like Mars transiting through your sixth house and employees. You've
Mhm.
had two notable health things that have come up that are sixth house Mars related things. And then finally, the third house, and as it relates to siblings, also came up just with respect to some of the health issues your sister has been
Mhm.
dealing with. Although, is she recovering well from both of
Yes.
those things?
Yeah, but we kind of laughed. I told her I was sorry that I was having that third house perfection year.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. So yeah, that's actually a really brilliant just demonstration of the multivalent meanings of
Mhm.
all of these different both natal placements as well as transits and how it can work out on a number of different levels and still all be archetypally consistent with what the placements are supposed to mean in a broad sense.
Right. And I didn't even realize all of it until I started making notes after you sent out the notice that you were going to do this. And I thought, oh, I didn't really have much. And I started writing it down and it kind of all came together. And I'm like, oh, okay, this affects a lot of different things. So,
Right.
mhm,
Yes, sometimes it's not, especially when you're in the moment, like we don't always
yeah.
recognize, because sometimes as astrologers, we expect it to be something like big and loud and like obvious, but sometimes these transits can be a little bit more subtle as you experience them, so you don't always connect like one to
Mhm.
one when it's happening. But sometimes when you start to get towards the end of those transits, you can look back and sort of realize what that was, and it sort of comes together and makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Cool. All right. I think that was a great example to start with. Thank you
Oh,
for
thank
sharing
you.
that.
Of course. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Awesome. That was a great example. I'm going to check the live chat because I'm not always able to see it at the same time. What did people think about that example in the live chat? Yeah, the super, super literal with the burning mouth. That's a really striking example. And also having to do with difficult conversations, Gina says. Yeah, absolutely. All right, cool. Well, that was a really good example. So let's move on to the next one. The next one I was going to talk to was Aaron.
Hi, Chris.
Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
What's your birth data?
So May 12th, 1982,
Okay. And what time?
11:26 and 50 seconds PM.
In 50 seconds?
Yeah, because it'll move
Nice.
it'll move my MC and IC.
Oh, okay. I thought your mother, somebody was there with like an
Just
atomic
that
clock.
good.
Yeah. What place?
Summit, New Jersey.
Is it 5 Capricorn rising?
Yep.
Got it. Okay. Here we go. So here's your chart. So
No.
Capricorn rising, night chart with Sun and Taurus in the fifth house. Jupiter is up there in Scorpio in the 11th, and Mars is in Libra in the 10th. And you actually have Venus in Aries in the fourth whole sign house natally, and that it's actually at 9 degrees of Aries, which is very close to where Venus stationed at 10 Aries. So what was this transit about for you?
So it was pretty on the nose because we did a third round of construction on our house that pretty much started and ended this entire Venus retrograde. So we started on March 3rd and it's wrapping up on Monday.
So you did like redesigning of your home
We
and
did.
living situation?
We redid our a bathroom, and it was interesting because anything that I had purchased, designed, planned before the retrograde worked out great. But everything that I ended up buying or designing once Venus went retrograde all had to be returned, didn't work out for whatever reason. So it was always like a setback or a delay. So it
Oh,
was just
wow.
kind of comical how
Right.
spot on it was.
Right. Because you had both Venus slowing down and stationing retrograde in your fourth house, and then Mercury also slowed down and went retrograde not too long after that, like a week or two later in your fourth house as well. So you're getting kind of a
Double
double
whammy.
whammy. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And then I also noticed because the retrograde also went back into my third house that throughout the process, because I have two little kids, we had to be out of the house a lot. So the amount of short distance travel that I did was increased exponentially. How much I was just kind of around the area where I live throughout on a day-to-day basis really went up.
Nice. Like traveling around your neighborhood.
Yeah, just having so many different places to go or just needing to kind of leave because of people in the house or the noise or whatever was going on. So having to be like, okay, let's go here and then we'll go here. And it was a lot
Nice.
busier.
Yeah, that makes sense. With respect to the redesign at home, I like that because it's very literal, and that's what I've been talking about when I feel like when Venus goes retrograde in a certain house in a person's chart, that sometimes they just have this internal compulsion to redesign or rethink or um, change something about the design of whatever that house is, the appearance or the aesthetics of whatever that area of their life is. And like if that happens in the first house, sometimes it's like a makeover in terms of their appearance or like getting a new haircut or changing something about their physical appearance. And sometimes in the fourth house, it's very literally like redesigning something at home. You didn't did this arise naturally in terms of doing the redesign at this time? Because you didn't like go out of your way to do it because Venus is going retrograde there, right?
No, I didn't go out of my way to do it, but I did kind of go out of my way to avoid the Mars retrograde because I was nervous about that and its effect on construction. So I kind of thought that it would be better to push it and deal with the Venus retrograde rather than that. And the last major, we did two other big phases of construction. This was kind of like the last piece, and those were back in 2023. And that was that last Venus retrograde through Leo. So I'd
Right.
already, we had already kind of had that. So this felt like a repetition, only more I don't know, a little more spot on because it was in my fourth house, my Venus return, and it felt a little different because of that.
Right, absolutely. And you said, and this is the final like phase of the reconstruction of like redesigning things.
Yeah, hopefully.
Okay,
For now.
nice. All right. Let's see what else. Were there any others? So you had um the Venus retrograde transit, and then you had the Mercury retrograde, and then the eclipse just happened in your fourth house at the end of all of that. On your Venus. Where's the construction at now? Is it still ongoing or is it done or
It's
what's
gonna
the
wrap up. It's supposed to be complete on Monday. So
Monday?
yeah, that'll hopefully be it, and we'll be done for a little while. I did have something interesting with the Mars retrograde that I just thought of with the last patron who was on and discussing that, which was
Hmm.
that my youngest daughter, who's a Cancer rising, she ended up the entire Mars retrograde, she ended up finally weaning. And it was interesting it being in my seventh house of that like close connected relationships and in her first house with this kind of like separation from the mother, that final. So that really kind of started with the Mars retrograde, and she officially has been done since probably the very beginning of March or even end of February. So right after the Mars station going direct, it just kind of wrapped it all up. So that was also interesting to watch kind of happen at the same in the same time span.
Yeah, that's incredible. So for her having that separation, where she's more of an individual and like she's
Mhm.
more um focusing on herself now suddenly in that like early stage of that being the very first time that she's had an experience like that of a transit and the
Yeah.
separation from you versus you having this other person that you're like fully bonded with that you have to create a separation or like some distance from at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. And it also went back into her 12th house and she dropped a nap at like dropped her nap. So she's not napping anymore. So it was also tied in with her sleep patterns. So it's just very, they all felt very like, oh, like obvious on the nose, kind of, this is what this is about, clearly.
Right, that makes sense. So she's Aquarius rising or what's her rising?
She's Cancer rising.
Or sorry, yeah, Cancer rising. Okay, yeah, so it retrograded back into the 12th. Trying to think of the yeah, okay. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Didn't it? Or
Uh
no, it went into her second.
yeah, like if
It went into her second.
she's sorry, if she's Cancer rising, then
It was her second, so it was like resources.
right, yeah, yeah. But that makes sense just in terms of the separation though. How close or what's the degree of her ascendant? Do you know offhand?
26.
26. Okay, yeah. So she's really finishing that up now. And that transit's about to be fully over.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Because she was super
Yeah.
accident prone too. During the times, anytime Mars crossed over her ascendant, which happened 3 times, there was always something that happened. Like this last time, she tripped and hit her head on the edge of the porch. So kind of got a big bump there, but it was just more, there was just something each time. So I was like always watching her.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, Mars first house transits can be tricky for just, sometimes getting into accidents or doing something impulsively and yeah, getting some bruises at that time. So it's nice to be finishing that up. How old is she?
She's 3.
3. Okay, yeah. So this is one of the first, it's probably the second like Mars and Cancer transit that she's even experienced in her entire life.
Mhm.
Cool. All right. Well, that's really good. Yeah, I think that's pretty solid. Was there anything else about your transits lately that made sense in terms of any of this?
No, I think those were the big ones that really seemed obvious.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, thanks for sharing that. That's a really good, like, straightforward example, but it gives us some really nice insights sometimes into how things can work out. Again, just going into some of those core principles of like the fourth house and the home and living situation, and the seventh house as those that you have close one-on-one personal relationships in your life.
Yep.
Cool. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
You see what people are saying in the live chat. Ketsia says Venus rules the fifth house of children in Aaron's chart, so that makes sense. Yeah, that could tie things in there with the retrograde. Excellent. That was great. So yeah, again, the this Venus retrograde and this Mars retrograde has been really useful to look at, especially in the context for all of the cardinal rising sign people. So Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn rising, because then both of those planets are going retrograde in an angular house, in a very prominent house of the chart. So you can sometimes see it like very vividly or much more vividly for the Capricorn or other cardinal rising sign people. All right. So the next one I was going to do was Jayleene. Hey, how's it going?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Excellent. What's your birth data
12/15/93,
and what time?
10:19 a.m. New York City.
Is your ascendant 12 Aquarius?
Yes.
All right. So here's your chart. So you have Aquarius rising, day chart with Sun and Sag in the 10th house or 11th whole sign house. Um, Jupiter's in Scorpio in the 10th, and Mars is in Sagittarius in the 11th. So what was going on with you, or what was this transit about for you?
Um, so I moved from California back to New York at the end of January, and I moved back in with my family. So I reconnected with my siblings, and I also reconnected with my childhood best friends, whom I've stayed and like best friends with throughout the whole 10 years that I've been gone.
Nice. So you
Um,
moved back home, you said at the end of January?
yeah, January 29th is when I like took the flight back home, but I didn't start seeing people. Like we had like a whole house a warming, not a housewarming, like a Jayleen's back thing, dinner with my friends on March 15th.
Oh,
Since it was winter, people didn't want to go out. So it took a
got
while
it.
to rally them all.
So after you said March 15th?
Yeah, that's when I started to see everybody again. Like I saw them individually, but very briefly, like my childhood best friends. Um, but yeah.
Nice. So that was, since you're Aquarius rising, that was Venus going retrograde in your third house of neighbors and siblings and also friends, especially in your immediate neighborhood. As we talked about in the third house episode, we were making a distinction between, 11th house as friends and groups, but also the third house as friends and groups, but especially those that are in your local environment and especially those that you grew up with. So that's a really literal manifestation of that.
Mm-hmm. Um, sorry, you go ahead.
So how long had you been gone from where did you move? Where were you living versus where did you move back to again?
I was living in San Diego, California,
Okay, so on the
and
other side of the country.
yeah, um, and I believe it correlated with an eclipse back in 2017 in March, but I don't remember which that I think it was the Virgo eclipses, but I can't be sure. Um,
You moved in early 2017.
yeah, I got the letter to go to grad school in March, and then I officially moved in June of 2017. Um,
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean that was 8 years ago. So March 2017 was the last time that Venus was retrograde in Aries in your
yeah,
third house.
yeah. And yes, and
Six,
Venus
seven,
rules
eight.
my fourth house as well. So and ninth house of travel, long distance
Got
travel.
it. Right. So here it is. So this is like March of 2017. We see Venus is retrograde in Aries in your third house. And so you're accepted to grad school and you move from New York to San Diego.
Well, it was Oakland, and then I moved 2 years later to San Diego. But yeah,
Got it. But to California in general. So this is like 8 years ago was you actually leaving the neighborhood roughly that you grew up in and like moving to the other side of the country, which is far enough away that it's like practically like you're moving to a different country and ending or like severing that relationship with your not just your local neighborhood, but also your local friend group that you grew up with, as well as your, having your siblings local to you. And then exactly 8 years later, the Venus retrograde repeats in basically March of 2025, and suddenly you've moved back and you have a party that's like reconnecting you with a lot of those people.
yeah. Um, so it was pretty nice to see that. I can't remember the exact dates from 8 years before 2017, but um, there was something else that correlated, but we don't have to talk about that because I don't really remember what it was.
From
I
like
don't have like,
2009, you mean?
yeah, I think I can't remember exactly what it was. So yeah,
That's okay. Um, could you describe like what was it like reconnecting with all of these people that you had, lost, I guess, 8 years ago? What were some of your feelings? Was it like I've noticed that like the Venus retrograde, that because Venus goes retrograde and starts moving backwards in the zodiac, sometimes there's this backwards looking component where you're looking back into your past. And,
Mhm.
it's most sort of a cliche at this point that sometimes that means romantic relationships from a person's past coming back into the present. But here with it in your third house, it's like a version of that, of these other types of relationships, third house relationships coming back from the past. What did that feel like to you?
Um, it was really nice. It kind of felt like when I left, I was a different version of myself, a little less healed, a lot more reactive. And now I have grown up a lot, so I think I have a better relationship with my siblings. And then I've watched my childhood friends find their partners and now become, more like they have their own lives, sort of. So it kind of during the retrograde, it felt like I was trying to find my place in their lives that now includes a partner that they have, if that
Hmm.
makes sense, and trying to see
Right.
like where I fit in to their daily routines. Um, yeah, so I think now that everything is stationed, or Venus, I think it might have just stationed. I'm not sure which, if it's today or tomorrow.
Yeah,
But
today.
okay. I feel like I've figured out the cadence in which we can hang out, like my friends and I, because it
Mm.
has felt very isolating. And I've also been like moving in. So, and also I've done some renovating, which I shouldn't have been doing during the retrogrades because I've experienced the same thing as a person before, where like I had to reorder things. Um, and I also like was doing a lot of uh, short-term travel because I was buying off of Facebook Marketplace.
Nice.
Um, oh, another thing that happened is since I shipped my car, I actually got like toll by mail where since my car was on the back of a trailer, they scanned my license plate and then
Oh
charged
no.
me instead of charging the shipping company.
Right.
So that's like a third house retrograde into second house thing. But that's completed now.
That's perfect. Yeah, was it like a lot of money for what they were trying to charge you?
Yeah, it was like $80 and obviously, and it was like for Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York, like separately. So I had to just let them know that my car was being shipped, but it was like a real big pain for no reason. But yeah.
Right. Yeah, I love that because that's such a little thing to happen, but that's like isolated to this little part of your life, and yet it's still like an important or notable like little thing that perfectly connected those two transits of like the third house and travel and the second house of finances.
Yeah.
That's good. And then you said there was also some with the Mars retrograde happening over the past few months in your sixth house that you've also had some issues in terms of your work.
Yes. So we last spoke when you were doing the second house transit, the live chart readings, and I let you know that I got a position with the federal government. Now that there has been an administration change, the Mars retrograde kind of has mirrored like all the confusion that has gone on since like the election. Um, and then being like, okay, well, all the like DEI programs that I work on are going to pretty much be eliminated and being afraid of that. And then
Hmm.
going forward, there was more and more like executive orders that were halting our work. Eventually, the probationary officers, since I'm like technically a contractor, I wasn't affected. My manager was, so she was laid off on February 13th. She's an Aries rising and then was reinstated, I think March 14th. And then she also got a new job at the state government on March 14th. And then now she has to take the deferred retirement program. So most of the people in our office that are under 3 years are opting to take the like severance pay thing now instead of the reduction in force potentially being laid off later when they reduce the federal government employees.
Okay.
So work has been tumultuous, and Mars has been directly opposing my moon during this time that rules my sixth house. But now it feels a
Yeah.
lot easier, I think. Like things are a little bit more settled in terms of like what's going on in the office. So
Right. So it would have been at its most intense basically in February, like immediately after the administration change happens and all the orders and start coming out around the time of the Mars station.
mhm, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's really rough. Yeah, because when was the second house one? That was like last fall, so you had just gotten that job. Well, then
Yep.
when was that? Like was that like September, October?
Mhm. So it was September 9th when I started the position, and it was a Virgo new moon, I believe.
That was like
And
right after Mars went into Cancer. You said September what?
9th.
9th. Yeah. It's like that was the initial ingress of Mars into Cancer into your sixth house, which went in just a week before you got the position at the beginning of September. Um, but that's a really good example of how like the Mars transit and the retrograde can be a sequence of events that plays out over many months, but it really starts as soon as that ingress takes place. But then there's an intensification of it when the retrograde degrees, the stations actually happen, especially that station in February when Mars stationed direct in the middle of Cancer in your sixth house of work.
Mhm. I also wanted to note that this past week has been like the Mercury station direct while squaring my Mars natally, and Mercury is my perfection year ruler. Um, and during this week is when everyone in the office just like this is when they had to submit their like they had to decide whether or not they were going to take the deferred retirement program and therefore like basically leave the job. And it was really sad because everybody loves their job and nobody wants to like be forced into leaving. And so like this past week has been really sad because like my manager finally came back. Um, and then now she's leaving again. And then everybody that I've worked with very closely all of a sudden is also leaving. So it felt like the Mercury stationing direct and then squaring my Mars was like all the retrograde with everything, including the Mars retrograde. Like finally everything has come to light, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Right.
Like
Yeah,
I,
and a bunch of like people like friends basically at work that you work with are all leaving.
yeah. So that's been really sad, but
Yeah.
astrology good.
Yeah. Very hashtag astrologer good of just when the transits are coinciding with really rough events, but the astrology is so lining up so well that you're kind of abstractly impressed by the astrology.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. Well, it's good that things have stabilized a little bit now that Mars is getting close to completing that transit through your sixth house. Um, what even what even precipitated you moving back to your hometown essentially during this
Oh,
time?
remember, obviously, probably not. But in our last, like when we did our last live chart reading, I had let you know that the third, we were looking at the third house eclipses going back and forth, and I had my brother had passed away.
Oh,
So
right.
I moved back to just be with my family.
Right. Now I remember. Sorry about that.
Oh,
Um, yeah, so that was back we were talking about that in terms of like the third house Aries full moon, right?
I can't remember exactly. It was in June. that it happened, but I believe you and I spoke about it in August.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So it was one of the solar eclipses in the Aries series, the Aries Libra series, and then this was the final eclipse. And on top of that, like a Venus retrograde and Mercury retrograde in your third house, and you decided to move home during this time. And this was you coming back home partially to support and be with your family.
Yeah. Um, I think it was like the Mars Uranus conjunction that coincided with my brother's passing. Um, but yes, yeah, that kind of spurred it all. So
Right. That was the Mars, Uranus, and Taurus in your fourth house.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Sorry, my memory like doesn't work very well anymore, but like once I'm sort of reminded of stuff, I can remember, but it's not very sharp anymore right now.
No, it's okay.
Um, Okay, that makes a lot of sense then, and that helps me contextualize and understand this even more so then, like how this Venus retrograde and you coming back and reconnecting not just with neighbors that you grew up with, but also with your neighborhood and with your siblings and everything else is has a lot more importance and like depth of meaning in terms of your story over the past few years than it already, has just from this current transit alone.
Yeah, and I'm pretty grateful for the opportunity or privilege to be able to move back and have like a support system that is still here.
Mhm.
While because they were there, they all like showed up after my brother passed, like all my childhood friends. Um, and like all my siblings are older than me, like 12 and 15 years older than me at least. So this is kind of the first time that I'm actually living with them as like a, because they were already off to college. But
Mhm.
it really brought us all back together in a very close-knit way. So I'm in many ways, obviously, it's a very sad, tragic thing, but it led to a lot of beautiful relationships being rekindled, which is very nice. So
Yeah. Yeah, that it changed your life in a way that's like very significant because your life path then did this not like I want to say U-turn in the sense that you went back to where you started, but you wouldn't have like perhaps made that change and gone back there to reconnect with all of those people if that hadn't happened. And so therefore sometimes one of the broader things I always see in people's lives and charts and transits is that sometimes a major loss or tragedy can force you to go in a direction that you might not have gone otherwise, and therefore it changes your trajectory in a very tangible way so that everything that happens subsequent to that results in that like important turning point in your life.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay. So that makes even more sense then, especially as this not just the Venus retrograde and how it connected you back from when you left 8 years earlier, but also the completion of the third house, the last Aries eclipse and the third house eclipse series, and how the loss of one of your siblings brought you back to essentially where you grew up with to reconnecting with friends and siblings and family from back in the past and that things came full circle in a much more significant way during this time over the past few months as a result of that.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Nice. That's really beautiful then, and I'm glad that we got to do this follow up and just yeah, hear where that ended up leading you, especially having these third house transits subsequent to that and bringing things full circle. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it.
yeah, of course. And if I find out what I was thinking about regarding the Venus retrograde in Aries prior, I'll send it in the chat or on Patreon or YouTube.
Yeah, let me know because I would be curious because it seems like those Venus retrogrades are important to you. So there probably was something significant in that one and
Yeah.
basically the first several months of 2009 when Venus went retrograde in your third house and then dipped back into your second house briefly.
Hmm.
Cool. All right.
Thank you so
Th
much, Chris. It was great speaking to you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, let me see. Everyone in the live chat says thank you and thanks for sharing. Okay, so Will, I think yours is a house that we haven't covered yet. And since it sounds like it ties directly into the retrograde ties into the topic of that house, it might be a good one. Will, I'm going to promote you to a panelist, and you've got a ninth house example to share. Hey, Will.
Hey there.
Hey, what's your birth data?
September 5th, 1986, Reno, Nevada. Should I flip my camera sideways too?
If possible, yeah. There we go. Uh, September 5th, 1986, at what time?
At 3:21 a.m.
And what place?
Reno, Nevada.
Oh, Reno. Okay. Reno, Nevada. All right. I'm a little out of it today. It is a full moon. I never sleep on well on full moons, so I'm functioning at half capacity today, but that's one of the things you got to learn to do as an astrologer is like still try to do your best even when you're not feeling 100% during readings or like consultations.
Yeah, I've actually been struggling with that myself because been I've I've tried and use the electional the electional forecast podcast that you
Mm,
do to do certain
right,
things, and like sometimes I've just been like so dead for the last couple months just because there's been so much going on. And I'm like,
right.
okay, I'm gonna try and do something, and then like something else will pop up. So like it makes it super hard to actually stick with that. But I get what you're saying. Like you have to keep track because sometimes with the elections, if you miss it during certain times, like you have to wait like a whole nother period of time. And like then do you want to wait or do you want to risk it? You know?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's an issue too in terms of sometimes the best election is at like some crazy hour, either very early in the morning or late at night, and then waking up and trying to do that, which itself can sometimes mean you're not 100% like awake or like on top of your game at those times. So there's a double-edged sword there of like getting the best electional chart, but also sometimes then not being as functional when you're trying to get that chart. So yeah, it's a challenge. All right. Rachel asked, did you intentionally schedule this live podcast to happen during the eclipse? No. Well, today's not an eclipse, it's just a full moon. Let me pull up our electional chart for today because that's actually worth just mentioning as the example. Let's see, is this it? Yeah, so this is the transit chart. I think you can see the transit chart right now, right, Will?
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, we just used Virgo rising today. So we started like an hour ago. Um, uh, the main timing for today was just that, let's see, that Venus is stationing direct today in Pisces. There is a full moon in Libra. I wanted to use Virgo rising, because now Mercury has stationed direct and we could put Jupiter in the 10th house. Of course, we have the Mercury Neptune conjunction, so that's not ideal, but this is our chart that we're working with. And then I'm going to have us finish up by the time the full moon goes exact, because after it goes exact, it's going to start applying to Mars. So that's kind of my electional thinking today. And I felt like today was better than tomorrow when there will be a moon square Pluto. So, but I was restrained by needing to do these on a weekend since more people are available on weekends rather than, during the weekday. All right. Sorry for that digression. What's your, let me put up your chart. All right. View chart. Is this correct? Yeah. You have 4 Leo rising.
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay. And we used your example you previously for like the third house or something, right?
Yes. Oh my gosh, another third house thing. You had mentioned at one point that you thought that maybe third house stuff could possibly tie into grandparents as well.
Hmm.
Crazy thing, I was doing a reading for a family member and I saw where something played out in their chart and I was like, oh, that seems rough. I didn't think of looking at my own chart to just kind of like verify. Um, and then when I lost my grandpa, I was like, okay, well, there's that. and when you were gonna do the recording for like I think it was the second house, because then you were gonna do the recording for the third house. But during that time, I was actually heading to see my grandpa, so it was crazy. So I was like, oh, I gotta tell him that, but I forgot.
Wow. Nice. That's great.
But yeah, I saw it play out in somebody else's like fourth house. I was like, okay, and then it was like played out in my third house, so it just kind of like played out with a signification. So it could be another point for the grandparents possibly being represented in the third.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. Good. Good to know. All right. So with your example, we're talking about your ninth house. You have an example of what was your example for today?
It's actually fourth and ninth house because I I had a solar return around the time that Mars entered into Cancer. Um, but it was just, I think that my solar return was just before that. But Mars, when he went retrograde, rules my fourth house. And I just started having a lot of issues with my landlord company, like the property management company that I was dealing with at the house I was living in. Um, and it ended up resulting in me like having to leave. They ended up filing some fraudulent documents claiming that like I hadn't paid rent and stuff. So like they were like legitimately going above and beyond. I was like, well, I don't want to have to deal with that anymore. And since I was dealing with that and I was expecting to get money from like moving out, I was like, all right, let me just leave the country and then I can actually go on and do the other things that I wanted to do anyways. Um, and so I was like, all right, I'm gonna go ahead and get ready to just leave, move to, I was gonna start here in Brazil, see people here, then go back to Spain and like just check out a few different places, see where it is exactly I want to move, right? Um, and it all just kept getting like completely like thrown off. Even my trip, my plans to come here, I wasn't paying attention to it at the time, but it just happened to be around the time that Mars was stationing and turning back. So like I was trying to book my tickets and everything to come here at the end of the month, at the end of December. But for some reason, it just wasn't working out. And I ended up having to wait until the next month, got my tickets for like later on that month and just came here to Brazil. Um, but yeah, it has me moving into a foreign country. And another thing that's kind of interesting is it's bringing me back to um, like I was last year and like the first time I came to Brazil was in like 2018, very beginning of 2018, like the end of 2017, beginning of 2018.
Mm.
Um, and it was after I made like a trip to Spain. I lived in Spain in 2000, from 2006 to 2008. I was there as a missionary. Um, and now like I'm going back out into the world and like doing my own thing. And I'm going to be talking about things, maybe not like I'll be talking about God and spirituality, religion and stuff like that, but from a different angle than what I did years ago when I went out as a missionary.
Got it. Okay. So, um, some of this relates to some challenges with respect to the Mars retrograde and some challenges that you had with, uh, was it with the foreign country or was it with some challenges you ran into with other people that caused you to go to a different country?
It was more so the people that were managing the place that I was living in that just kind of made it to where I was like, all right, I'm done with this. I'd wanted to move back. I wanted to like come here to Brazil like years ago, but the COVID stuff started getting really crazy, and I'm like, I'm just gonna go back home, and I'm gonna hang out there for a bit. Um, and then like when all of this stuff started just going out of control, I was like, all right, I'm gonna just go ahead and make a jump, and I'm gonna go for it. Especially because I'd already looked at like my my solar return chart. I looked at like my perfections and progressions. I looked at all kinds of different things. I'm like, well, this is my year for like Venus to like do her thing. So let's see what she does. I just wasn't actually, I hadn't actually like planned everything out necessarily. I was just trying to go for it. And during the Venus retrograde, like a lot of things just kept reminding me of the fact that guess what? You didn't really set things up properly. So we're gonna have to figure it out.
Got it. Okay. So the Venus retrograde in your ninth house was you relocating to another country?
Yeah, and I'm still trying to figure out exactly how I'm going to do that because when I was back in the States, third house, I did Uber, and I'm also like I'm a consulting astrologer, so like I was able to like get a lot of clients because I was doing Uber, because I was talking to people and they could see that I knew what I was talking about, right?
Mhm.
And so I was thinking, oh, okay, cool. Well, when I get out there to Brazil, I'll just continue on with my clients and stuff, and I'll be fine. All I need is a few a month to like make it, right? I wasn't thinking about the fact that I wasn't going to be doing Uber, so I wasn't going to be catching new clients that way. So I was like, ah. And I'm like, all right,
Right.
well, I'll have to pivot and then see if maybe social media will be a way to do it. Um,
Right, because previously we talked about you having like Venus as the ruler of the 10th in the third, and how you were driving for Uber at the time, I think was part of the example last time we talked.
oh, that's right, it was actually. That was
Okay.
when uh, Venus was transiting through my second house, and um, I ended up making like a really good amount that month. And it happened to be like linked to my sister, who was the reason for me being there in the first place. And then another sister, like like there was a lot of things like linking my third house stuff to actually siblings and my career.
Got it. And okay, so Venus going into your ninth house. So you have Leo rising for those listening to the audio version. So Venus and Mercury went retrograde in your ninth house, and you get out there and you now relocated to another country, but you're running into some issues in terms of like work and finances that are side effects of that. And it sounded like the Mars retrograde, especially the station in like February, was running into some tensions with some people, um, that sort of precipitated things or caused you to move.
Um, the It was when Mars actually entered into Cancers when I started having issues with him. And then in November, around the time of like mm, as the Mars Pluto was getting more exact, is when I started actually like I was like I can't stay here, I need to move. So like I ended up leaving for like at that point I just left the place. Um
Got it.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess part of it is just because Mars is retrograde in your 12th house, and sometimes the 12th house in ancient astrology was associated with traditionally with like enemies, but in a modern context, sometimes it can just be like people that you don't get along with very well. And since Mars stationed like early near your ascendant in December, and you're experiencing the whole Mars Pluto opposition across your either 12th house, 6th house axis or your first house, 7th house axis, that there was some tensions with other people that were ongoing throughout that Mars retrograde that eventually pushed you to relocate.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Um, and then the eclipse, the last Aries eclipse, just took place in your ninth house at the end of March. So do you feel like you'll be abroad for a while now, or what are your
Yeah,
plans?
the plan is to pretty much figure out exactly where like everything's in such a like a confusing state. Like I feel like the astrology of like March really just kind of threw everything off because um there's just so much that's going on with like the retrogrades and the sorry, I've got a friend that's popping in. The retrogrades and the eclipses to where like I've just been kind of like thrown off by all the energy. There's like a whole bunch of back and forth. Like, the Mercury going retrograde right after the eclipse, and then like stationing at the same point that we had the Aries eclipse. And like I'm slowly starting to figure out a lot about what exactly like how things should work out and how I could possibly work them out. I'm hoping
Mhm.
that with the Venus stationing direct and going direct, like I'll have a better idea of how like a lot of my finances and things like that are going to work out. As it is,
Right.
like it's
Okay.
already, yeah, it's already brought me more because a lot of it depends on what exactly I'm able to afford. um, because if I don't have too much coming in that I won't be able to keep on going like into further areas.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. Now I understand. So it's like the Venus and Mercury stationing in your ninth house and then retrograding back into your eighth house. And the fundamental tension that you're dealing with during this time is between relocating to a foreign country, but then how that's affected your financial situation and the tension between those two that's like playing out during the course of this retrograde. But hopefully now that both planets have stationed direct and they're going to move out of your eighth house and back into your ninth in order to finish things up there. Hopefully, some of those initial setbacks and things that you've experienced after that move will start to settle down a little bit so you can start moving forward again.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping because like there's a lot that's like tied up for me with like from the second to the fourth, all the way from like the eighth, not the eighth, the ninth, 10th, and 11th. Like that's all like tied in with the different retrogrades that we've had. Like we had Mars who went retrograde. Then before he was out, Venus went retrograde. Same time as she actually stationed to go retrograde, Mercury was entering his shadow. Like there's so much. It's just kind of like mixing so much together. So my fingers are crossed, and I'm sure that like as Venus starts to actually go like direct herself and it when she leaves her shadow soon, we'll be fine. Like I'll be in the clear and I'll be able to understand things a lot better just because while they're still in that period, like yes, she's turned around now. She's going to be turning around, I think, within the next couple hours. That'll be great. But when she actually continues on in the morning star phase, it'll be a lot more supportive of actually going out there and doing things and like making things happen.
Right.
Especially because like I have actually started posting, even though like I don't like it. I've been like at least blog posting. I've been doing that, so like I've been getting that going. But like trying to actually do things and make movement happen.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Usually, when Venus starts to, I mean, we've seen that in some of the examples so far with Mars, that now that Mars is finally getting towards the end of Cancer and is starting to pick up steam again, that some of the problems that were set up during the retrograde and the backwards movement, people start to slowly step out of that almost as if you were in like quicksand for a while, but you start to grab a hold of something and pull yourself out slowly until eventually you're back up and walking away from that period where you got stuck for a little bit. Sometimes that's people's experience of retrogrades. And
Yeah,
yeah, after this point, hopefully with Venus moving forward again, that'll be helpful.
yeah. Especially with Mars being in the 12th, like I haven't been able to sleep for like shit. Like it's been pretty rough for quite some time. So it would be great to have him out of there in a place that's more stable and supportive of like forward action, everything else going forward as well. So fingers crossed, we'll see what happens. Either way it goes, I'm
Yeah.
like riding the wave. I'm learning to do that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think the 12th house does relate to sleep. I always think about it symbolically of how the 12th house was the sign that was rising in the hour or two prior to when you were born. So it's kind of like the sign that was rising an hour or two before you woke up for the first time and like had your first full day of life. Um, it's one of the reasons I sometimes think about symbolically why the 12th might relate to sleep, and just empirically, it often does seem to for different reasons.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, buddy. Thanks for sharing that example. I appreciate it. That was a good example.
All right. Thank you.
All right, thanks. All right, let me check the live chat. Sadie says, thanks for sharing, Will. Yeah, he's got a lot of dignified planets. I think we talked about that last time, especially the Venus in the third. And one of the cool things in the third house episode, I think, is Will also has like a lot of siblings. Oh yeah, no, that was it. Has a lot of siblings and had lived with his siblings at different points with the IC in the third house. It was a great example of that. Okay, Amelia, Cancer rising. All right, I don't, yeah, let's try it. Amelia, let me see. If you're Cancer rising, I don't remember if we've done one of those yet. Are you ready to come on video? All right, what's your birth data?
It's 4/4/1980,
What time?
10:47 a.m.
And what place?
It's Woodside, Queens County, New York. Sometimes so I think it's hard for them to find that one, so you could also just do Astoria, New York, if you can't find that.
Is your sun at 15 Cancer?
Yeah.
All right. So here's your chart. For those listening to the audio version, we're looking at a chart with 15 degrees of Cancer, the sun in Aries at 15 degrees of Aries in the 10th whole sign house. Let's see, Jupiter in Virgo in the 3rd and Mars in Leo in the 2nd, retrograde. All right, so what's your example or what's been going on with you? Your primary thing is the Mars retrograde, obviously retrograded back and stationed very close to your ascendant degree.
Yeah, so I thought it was kind of a weird example for Mars in retrograde, or it took me by surprise that the manifestation of, but the backstory is that when I was born at home. It was 1980, so paperwork, acted a lot differently back then. And I was given my father's surname on my birth certificate, like most normal children do. And then when I was entered into school, my mom forged my birth certificate to give me her last name. And so I've had all of my identification as my mom's maiden name, except for my birth certificate. So I started this process like a year ago, but in October, when which was like mid-October when Mars was in Cancer still, but I think it was in its shadow period at that point. I got a denial. So I legally changed my name to Amelia Merrick last June. That went fine. I got the court order, but it takes weeks, if not months, to get any kind of like response from vital statistics in my city that I was born in New York. So in this case, it was like 4 months, and I got a rejection letter in October that said, we cannot change your name on your birth certificate to match your legal name in this court order because there's these identifiers that aren't on the court order because state bureaucracies don't talk to each other. So this is like a name that I've been using my whole life, which is Amelia Merrick. And I just wanted to change one document, which was my birth certificate. So I didn't have to change my entire identity and like documents there on forward, which includes driver's license, passport, social security number, stuff like that. And so October is when I got the denial letter, and it's been like months of going back and forth with vital statistics, refusing to change my name because of the lack of these identifiers. So then in March, I got really overwhelmed, and I just decided that I was going to actually reverse course and change my identity to my original surname, which was my father's surname. And I just had court yesterday, and I just did that. Like I finished that. I had that date. I set that court date in March, had it yesterday. So in theory, going forward, I should be, it's going to cost extra money. It's not cheap to change your name. So I've natal Mars in the 2nd house. So I had to like double the cost of changing my name 2 times. So I don't know, the whole like identity
That's funny. So it did connect the 2nd house and the 1st house because you're going through a long extended process of trying to change your identity in a sense, but it was also costing you a bunch of money at the same time.
I mean, what should have cost $250 with a court name change and a vital statistics fee is now going to cost me upwards of $1,000 for
Wow.
another court name change. And then I have to change my driver's license, my social security card, my passport, my CPF, like all of the things, my global entry card, all of that stuff. So once the fees add up, it will cost me a significant amount of money to make my birth certificate match my identity, which has been in the news lately with like the SAVE Act and stuff. Which is
Oh,
just,
right. Because if it doesn't, you're not going to be able to vote now,
yeah,
basically.
yeah, which
Wow.
is not the
Okay.
reason why I'm doing it. I'm doing it for immigration purposes.
Mhm.
And my immigration lawyer was like, you need to have your birth certificate match your passport.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah. So I mean,
Um,
that's just one example of how like this law could affect people if they don't get this taken care of, but also like the hurdles and cost of making it a barrier for people, which I thought that was kind of interesting that it's all happening at the same time.
you're doing it for immigration purposes in the sense of so that you could immigrate if you wanted to, or do you have an intention to?
Yeah, my father is a Bulgarian citizen and I'm trying to get basically get an EU passport. But
Got it.
I can't even start that process until my name matches my other documents, which has now taken a year almost to do.
So that's the Venus retrograde component is like Venus is just stationed in your ninth house on your in Pisces in your ninth whole sign house on the degree of your midheaven. And you just had some court case yesterday that was an important turning point.
Yeah, I finally just took my birth certificate name, which is my father's last name, which, you know, he was estranged from me. He left when I was 6 months old, so I have no like personal relationship to it. But I guess the plus side is that for immigration purposes, having a Bulgarian last name will look better on my application. So that's the plus.
Yeah. If you need to like skip town if things start getting sort of sketchier here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
All right. That makes sense. So that's really interesting because that's tying together both of the retrogrades as well as it's showing, this is not a theory, but it was something that I saw really clearly for the first time in the 2003 when I started doing the 2003 Venus retrograde, where that cycle used to be in Virgo and Leo. And when I was doing the research, a lot of people had events that were connecting like two houses. And so I was really curious, like how this Mars retrograde was going to connect two houses in people's charts. And this is a really fascinating example of that here, where just, Mars went retrograde in your second house and it retrograded back into your first. And the core issue was like trying to do these things to change your identity and running into obstacles and challenges in the process of that, but then having greater expenditures as a result. So that obviously ties together the first and the second, but then also Venus retrograding back into and stationing in your ninth house, and the purpose behind a lot of this being potentially relocating to another country at some point, so that getting it to start going through has now opened up your opportunity at least to be able to travel or to immigrate to a foreign country if you need to.
Yeah, and I have one more like legal hurdle to overcome, which I'm hoping that these eclipses in the ninth and third help that situation, because that's another like barrier for me, is just like clearing up some old legal stuff
Mm.
that I have an interview to meet with a lawyer on next Wednesday for. So, you know,
Got it.
that hasn't really like clarified yet. You know, it's like this is like before I can even like send in that application. But I mean, I have like a natal stationing direct Mars in Leo. That's like it's retrograde, but it's actually stationing direct in my chart.
Mm.
And then the whole like identity stuff with having my luminary is like ruled by Mars as well.
Right, for sure.
How
Yeah,
I,
I mean,
you know, like, yeah, how I'm perceived, I guess, and what my name is.
yeah, I mean, even the Venus retrograde, Venus and Mercury retrograde stations were, not too far off of your sun. They're at 15 degrees of Aries. So it's interesting how that's kind of relevant as an overlapping theme as well in terms of identity and like public identity, especially with the 10th house.
Yeah, I mean, I love to live dangerously, so during during the Venus retrograde near my sun, I did buy a pair of scissors and cut my own hair for the first time, which I know is very taboo. You're not supposed to do that.
Nice. I mean, no, I mean, sometimes, I don't know, sometimes while those are guidelines, it's like sometimes the guidelines are meant to be broken.
Yeah.
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 Nice. Okay. Well, I think that's a pretty good example, and I like it, especially just because it gives further insight into the first house. And when I did the first house episode, that was something I talked about, how the first house seems really abstract sometimes when you try to explain it, or especially when I try to teach it, because the primary keyword for the first house is like you, that it represents you in the chart and your um, identity, especially, but what you means, what the concept of you is in the chart, as opposed to the concept of other people in your life, which is what the rest of the chart tends to represent, or other situations in your life. Sometimes, even though that seems really abstract, sometimes when you have a first house transit, the concept of you and your identity, how you appear to the world and different things like that can come up in very specific and obvious ways. And this is like actually a really great example of that.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't come out unscathed on a physical manifestation either, but it was pretty minor. But yeah, I thought it was sort of an interesting like signifier, I guess, that I hadn't really thought about deeply until it happened.
Right. What was the physical thing?
Um, I I got into a bike wreck like 2 months ago, or sorry, not 2 months ago, in mid-March, and I gashed my shin open quite grossly. Wasn't severe, but I will have a significant scar. But
Hmm.
if in January during the Mars retrograde, I got a tattoo on my other shin, and as like kind of like medicine, I guess, for the transit. And I just thought it was funny that it was the exact placement. The injury was the exact placement of where the tattoo was, but just on the other leg. It's like my tattoo artist would have been really mad at me if I had messed
Right.
up
That's really
a
that's really
tattoo.
funny. So it's like you tried to propitiate it with the tattoo first, but then you still ended up having like a injury to the other leg, basically.
Yeah, in the exact same spot, but just other limb. Mhm.
Yeah, so I mean, that's another good one. So it's like first house and yeah, the first house can represent the body and like the physical appearance, and like getting a tattoo, which is literally like a um not nail gun, but a needle like puncturing the skin like very rapidly in order to create the pattern. And then the other, first house Mars classic thing is sometimes getting a scar or having bloodshed of some sort, which you could have seen that transit coming and maybe being more nervous because there's like extreme examples of that could have been worse. But then you had that, and obviously there was blood and you have a scar, but it also, and therefore that'll leave like a permanent mark on your body that you'll remember that Mars retrograde transit from. But it also wasn't the worst case scenario. So it's kind of, again, just interesting in terms of one of the challenges looking at difficult transits coming up is we can never fully gauge the level of intensity because it's always going to be on like a spectrum of possible manifestations, and it's not sometimes until the event comes that you fully know the level of intensity or extremeness. And most of the time when it finally happens, typically it's more um, manageable than we might expect ahead of time in some instances.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I saw the transit coming. I knew it was my first house. I was a little nervous, and especially I commute to work by my bike, not far, but it's busy area. So I had actually been really nervous about getting hit by a car this whole time. But in the end, it was just like I hit the curb at the wrong angle and I just flipped over and it was on a sidewalk. So
Mhm.
like I still hurt myself on my bike, but the thing that, I was sort of catastrophizing, I guess, like how bad it could be. But it also made me more cautious knowing that the transit was happening and I was like trying to be more aware of my surroundings with cars and stuff like that.
Right.
I mean, I guess, yeah, you could like sort of see if you're to try to be more self-aware of your surroundings during these kinds of transits.
Right. I mean, that's the fundamental tension as astrologers is like we are more aware and we do try to avoid stuff more. And yet sometimes there's still things that happen despite our best, I don't know, being on guard or our best efforts, which is not to say that the being on guard doesn't matter, because I do think that sometimes that mitigates things, especially when there's things within our control or ways in which situations could be worse if we don't restrain ourselves, like during difficult transits. And yet at the same time, there's also like a level of something still happening and the energy still needing to manifest in some way, like one way or another.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. All right, that's a really good example. Thank you for sharing that. That's I hope
Thanks
that
for having
works
me
out well. And yeah, let me know how that turns out.
on. Maybe I'll come on for your next Virgo Pisces eclipse series, and maybe my legal passport issues will have some fruition to them.
Yeah, maybe you'll be in like Europe by that point and you can
Yeah.
Zoom and join the Zoom and tell us how things are going.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Fingers
All right.
crossed. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thanks. All right. Let me look at the comments. Yeah, these have been some great examples today. Jen says, thanks for sharing. Does anybody have an example of one of these retrogrades in a house that we haven't covered yet, where the retrograde clearly activated the topic of that house in a way that's really like striking and obvious with the sign that it went retrograde in? Let me know in the comments if you do. Okay. Um, Partners resources. So we haven't done any that tied in the eighth house and partners resources. So that could be a good one, Abby. Do you want to join me to share that? Hi.
Hi, Chris. Thank you. I
Yeah,
feel
thanks for joining me.
here. Yeah, thank you. I'm excited to be here and share my ninth, eighth house story and this current retrograde cycle, where it's
What,
going. Um,
what's
it's
your birth data?
it's 1:13 p.m. Albany, New York, April 10th, 1953.
All right. Okay, right. Yeah. So you have the Sun Venus Cazimi or Sun Venus conjunction. You were born under this Venus retrograde in Aries in 1953. And you have Leo rising for those listening to the audio version with the Sun at 20 Aries, conjunct Venus at 24 Aries, opposite to Neptune at 22 Libra and Saturn at 24 Libra. Your Jupiter and Mars are both in Taurus in the 10th house. So what's been going on, or what did you want to share in terms of how these transits have been working out for you?
Well, it's interesting because on March 1st, the Saturday just before, all this activity of retrograde cycles began, I um, culminated a lot of heavy research into a paper that I delivered on that Saturday to a group of women. And the paper took me, I'm committed to writing these papers every year. And it's like an adventure, and this particular one focused on eclipses. And I was inspired actually by a lot of your presentations on the Astrology Podcast for prompting me on to this paper that I wrote. And to make a long story short, I came out of the end of the paper incredibly desirous to see an eclipse in my lifetime. I missed the one last year in April, even though it was practically in my own backyard. And so I'm now on a quest to go to Luxor, Egypt in 2027, because that will be the really big one that will last for 6 minutes and 32 seconds. And I'm now trying to make plans for that. And so during this whole cycle, since March 1st, I've been planning this trip to Luxor. I already know what hotel I want to stay in and exactly what room I want to be in. And also during this time, and I've been very homebound because I'm a 24/7 caregiver right now in my life. So I don't have that Aries freedom except when I'm studying and gaining higher knowledge. So for instance, for this paper for next year, I already sort of focused in on who I want to write about, which are two of the women artists who designed tarot decks. Pamela Coleman Smith and Lady Frida Harris. And so this quest is taking me on an adventure and a trip that I want to take to New York shortly. Um, in like the week after next. And I'm going on a trip on Tuesday. Just because I need to I want to just be away, away from where I am now, not in my normal third house, you know, place where I seem to always be existing, especially right now. So it's just been a very interesting cycle for me, picking these destinations, planning them, thinking about them. And in order to make that happen, I have to, I'm not a money maker, I'm a spender. I was born into money. Um, all my life, I haven't had to really work for, I haven't had to work for it. It's just sort of been there for me. Although I have periods where, I have high and lows where I feel like I have more or less. I've been through a real less time in recent years. So, making these decisions to do things that I want to do with expenditures, I have to, think about how I'm spending them. I have to, I need to consult with others. I can't make these decisions on my own. It's like I have to get permission in a kind of a way. I'm not, even at this late date in my life, I'm not calling my own shots when it comes to, thinking about making plans like this. So I'm always engaged in that eighth house, I feel like experience.
Sure. So you're making plans for like a trip, for like an international trip, but your personal finances are tied up with your partner's finances, and that's part of Venus's connection in terms of going retrograde in your ninth house of travel and going back and stationing direct in your eighth house of shared resources.
Yeah, I think. And also with Venus in Pisces, somehow, vanity seems to have been for the forefront during especially this retrograde. And so I also want to spend big bucks on, self beautification. And so it's like I mean, my budget could keep going on and on and on and on and on. And that I have to rein myself in and figure out where my priorities are right now and what's really important, I'm having to take a good look at that, especially on this birthday and especially at this late date, because I only have, like 2 more Venus retrogrades to go through in this lifetime when I think about it, you know? It's interesting.
Sure.
It's interesting.
So, the paper you published it on March 1st, you said?
Well, I delivered it publicly. In
And
other
what
words,
was that on?
it was on eclipses. It was actually Um, well, it became a focus paper on Mabel Loomis Todd, who was married to an astronomer who was an eclipse chaser in the 19th century. And Mabel Loomis Todd also was responsible for discovering and publishing all of Emily Dickinson's poetry and letters. So without Mabel, Emily would never have been discovered. And I started channeling Mabel in my life. And this woman traveled, she has a Guinness Book of World Records for seeing eclipses in the 19th century with all of her travels. And she traveled all over the planet to see eclipses with her husband. And I felt while I was researching the paper that I was almost like traveling with her and wanted to, follow in her footsteps with the energy that I have left. I mean, really, writing about her has been the catalyst to spur me on. So it was through this research of eclipses that, finally I landed into Mabel's lap and kind of ran with her. for months. And I have a bookshelf of everything she ever published and wrote, plus everything written about eclipses that you could possibly accumulate. I have a library that exceeds normal libraries.
Nice. So yeah, there's lots of ninth house themes there. And was this like an academic presentation, or what was the
Yes.
context of presenting it?
Yes, in fact, the paper will ultimately be stored in the archives in the Schlesinger Library at Radcliffe University. So it's pretty, it's heavy duty. It's a paper with gravitas. Um, and I
Yeah.
also was thinking of turning it into a PowerPoint presentation, to share with others, because I feel like I need to share my knowledge and learning out there with others, instead of just accumulating and accumulating and accumulating.
Got it. Okay. I love that. So you have Leo rising, you have the ruler of the ascendant in the ninth house in Aries, conjunct that retrograde Venus, and you're very like academically focused, and then you researched and delivered for the first time an important paper with Venus stationing retrograde in your ninth house.
Yes, and also I have just a background of I think I'm very proud of my higher learning that I've accomplished in this lifetime, my degrees. Like I enjoy wearing my rings from all of the universities I've received degrees from, lined up in a little line. They make me feel good about myself, that mark of higher learning. It's interesting.
What's your academic background and training?
I studied first as a landscape architect. So I have a deep connection to the earth. Uh, my training, my bachelor degree was in that field. My master's degree from Harvard was in that field. And then I took on serious astrological study learning, which feels very ninth house, after 9/11. And it's been a deep dive into this subject ever since. I mean, I'm just, I'm so glad, I'm just so grateful I discovered astrology. I can't think of a higher ninth house adventure. Even though I'm tied to my home and caregiving, I feel like I'm traveling further than most people who, get on planes multiple times a year travel in the course of just a day.
That's a really good point. That the ruler with like so much ninth house emphasis, that the ninth house emphasis can sometimes be literal travel and especially foreign travel, but it's also the place of education and knowledge and learning, and the travel can also happen in the mind, and not just physically.
Yes, and it's also interesting because on several of the Venus retrogrades in the past, I literally have been in foreign places on my birthday during that time. Like at age 16, I was in Israel, and in uh, in 2009, I was in Jamaica. In 2017, I was in Italy and France during my birthday. And I didn't, say, oh, I need to be in a ninth house place on my birthday. It just happened to happen that way.
Right. So it's like you're born almost on a Sun Venus cazimi with Venus retrograde in Aries in your ninth house. And periodically, this same retrograde from your birth repeats every 8 years, and you find yourself traveling to a foreign country around those times.
Yeah, but only because of this topic and lecture have I actually like looked back over all the 9 Venus retrograde uh, cycles to see and place where I was and what I was doing during that time. It's very, very interesting in hindsight. Um, and I think about it more poignantly right now. And even bound here, I'm figuring out ways to get away during this time. It's just so interesting.
Yeah, I love that because it's something that just happened naturally in your life, that you happen to do that like every 8 years around your birthday. But now, learning this technique that the Venus retrogrades repeat every 8 years and that you have that natal signature in your ninth house, it sort of like falls into place of why that pattern happened basically.
Yes, and I think it also focuses on during the retrograde cycle, reminding me, because it's always passing over that ninth house, how really, I think when all is said and done, when I express myself best, it's with ninth house topics and in a ninth house place of being. So, and so it's almost like I had to revisit that after giving the paper this year, I feel. I really started to really think about, what do I want to learn about again? So I signed up yet again for the tarot course I took with the London School of Astrology, just so I could revisit it. I'm revisiting lectures I took with the School of Morbid Anatomy. I'm revisiting lectures that I signed up for you from eons ago. I don't even remember what they were anymore, but I'm revisiting them again. It's like I'm relearning. I always feel like I have to learn and learn and relearn. And especially, it's very poignant right now during this retrograde cycle.
Nice. I like that. So the backwards looking component of things coming back from the past and looking back to the past for you because it's happening in your ninth house is you going back and revisiting topics of higher education and sometimes divination that you've studied in the past and refreshing yourself on some of those things.
Exactly.
I,
Exactly.
I love that. That's really
Yeah.
great. That's really insightful just into the way that the Venus retrograde can be backwards looking and bring things back from the past. But sometimes that's not all just like people or places, but it can be topics of study, basically, in this instance with the ninth house.
Absolutely, with study. Um, I feel that's where it's hitting me the most. And it's so interesting because I know that Venus is in a few hours finally going direct. And it's so interesting because I've even had trouble opening the few birthday gifts I've received until waiting for this direct moment. You know, I'm just opening them now to look at them and, allowing Venus to come in. I think being born with Venus retrograde, it's hard. It's kind of like, a sponge doesn't know how to let the water come through the right way, you know?
Hmm.
Um, so
Right.
I was very
That-
glad when by progression, Venus went direct in my life. After I studied astrology, I realized when that moment was coming, it was a moment to kind of celebrate. And then when Venus by progression entered Taurus, I, started the Abbey Beautification Project. And then, and then, and now I just want to, use my knowledge and put it out there and gift it out back out there in the world with what time I've got left. But I'm still thinking about vanity. I've got to look good while I'm doing it. That Leo rising gets in the way.
Right. Yeah, that so it comes up as a first house component just because you have the ruler of the ascendant conjunct Venus like in that sign that the retrograde is hitting now so that there's a first house body and like appearance component to it.
Yeah, and the Mars retrograde through the 12th and first house. And also this is a first house perfection year for me, which I'm thrilled about.
Mm.
Thrilled to have, the sun be the pilot this year as opposed to the moon last year. That was not fun. That was like being in turbulence every other day.
Yeah, so you're just getting out of your 12th house perfection year and 2 days ago you just moved into a first house year, so you're setting a new foundation for the next 12 years.
Exactly, exactly. And that feels very refreshing um, for me right now. I mean, I haven't looked at all the aspects that are, I mean, I know challenges are there, but right now I'm just sort of focused on the first house, the perfection, Venus going direct, um, Mars entering Leo, all of that after this whole retrograde cycle.
Yeah, that's exciting. It's the beginning of a new 12-year perfection cycle, but also the new 8-year Venus cycle, it seems like, since this Venus retrograde in Aries is your natal one. So it's opening up a new sequence of like 8 years that you'll revisit then, like 8 years from now, the next time Venus goes retrograde in Aries.
Yeah, I've already looked ahead. In fact, another interesting exercise was looking at the placement of Saturn during all of these cycles, because Saturn was such a nice, I mean, it has such a role against my sun and Venus in my birth chart. It's directly opposite Venus. Um, so I just was looking at, thinking about Saturn in Pisces this year versus the years when Saturn was in Capricorn, the one year when it was in Taurus during this retrograde cycle. And then, looking ahead, I thought, oh, I don't like where Saturn's going to be in the next cycle or the one after that for me. I'm already not happy with Saturn in the next goes around. Oh, well,
Yeah.
but that's
Well,
okay.
yeah. I mean, it'll be interesting, yeah, that shift of Saturn going into your ninth house and just as well as Neptune recently entering your ninth house and maybe getting more serious even about some of the studies that you're focused on. Although it's interesting because part of the overlap is you're also focusing on some kind of like occult or sort of quasi-spiritual type topics, like you were talking about focusing on the tarot and some of the women who were involved in illustrating cards and things like that, right?
Exactly. Yes. And I've studied the tarot. In fact, I came into astrology with a tarot background. Um, so that was sort of like a foundation when I began this study. Um,
That's interesting. You said 2001 was when you got into astrology, right?
yes, and I began studying the tarot seriously around 1990, so about 10 years earlier. So I knew the deck. I was already giving readings to people when I began studying astrology seriously right after 9/11. And
Yeah.
I'd been seeing astrologers for solar return readings for many years leading up to that, but my desire to truly want to begin learning began then.
2001 was another Venus retrograde in Aries year. So it's interesting that later in the year that you had a solar return with Venus retrograde on your sun was the year that you got into astrology.
Yes, and it's so interesting because I've had to work hard to figure out how to find astrology at the time, and I discovered astrology through Joseph Crane, who I'm sure you're familiar with. And so I had a Hellenistic foundation, which was amazing for me to be, getting my learning from the ground up with that foundation from Joseph Crane at the time. And it just took off from there. It just took off from there.
Nice.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, I think that's an amazing example. I love how the natal signature of just having those ninth house placements is giving you that predisposition towards ninth house topics throughout your life, and how the activation of Venus retrograde in Aries subsequent times has unlocked different stages almost in terms of your journey with that. So that's really beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, I can't wait for your podcasts to come out, when they come out, it's like there's an excitement there with higher learning. I'm learning all the time, trying to keep my brain sharp and honed at this chapter of life. So thanks for letting me share. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, and thanks for, yeah, that's a great example of just multiple things, but especially just having the ruler of the ascendant in the ninth house and that lifelong love of learning. So I love that. Thank you for sharing it. Yeah, Ashley says beautiful. Thank you for sharing, Abby. Great ninth house story. Tanya says thank you for sharing, Abby. Yep, that's a good observation about the first house perfection year. Beautiful. All right. I think that might be it for today. I'd like to keep going, but I'm a little running low on energy. So I think that was such a good example that I want to end on a high note. I always try to like go out on a high note when it comes to these, and I can't think of any way to get any higher than that because that was just a very beautiful example, having that signature natally in the chart and having it reactivated again. Um, and even this obviously is also connected with that in terms of 2 days after the solar return and, appearing in an episode of the Astrology Podcast. So that's really beautiful. All right. Thanks everyone for joining me for this today. Thanks everyone who shared your chart and shared your stories. I really appreciate it. I love, we talk so much on the forecast episodes about these transits when they're coming up and what we're anticipating from them, and we give news updates as we go about stuff that's happening in the news that coincided with these transits. But sometimes it's only when you talk to people directly about their personal lives and how these transits worked out in retrospect that you can truly get a deeper understanding of the importance of some of these retrogrades and eclipses and everything else. And that's when it comes alive, but it's also becomes very beautiful. Both when talking about and dealing with some of the positive things that happen, but also in dealing with some of the challenging things that happened at the same time. We can learn a lot about that as astrologers, and I feel like especially today, we learned a lot about the nuances of different houses based on where the transit was. And I think that's always the biggest opportunity, is being able to develop more nuanced understandings of what the houses and the planets mean by hearing how these transits played out in people's lives, especially when it's like something the person just experienced or is in the process of experiencing, because then in talking with them, you can talk out some of the nuances and details, not just about like the sequence of events, but also about how that made them feel during the course of it, or what their personal reflections are in terms of the impact that had in their lives. So that's one of the reasons why it's valuable to do that, like right in the moment, or right coming off of a period like this, like we did today. Um, all right. I think that's good for this. We might revisit this again in the future, because I like doing these episodes where we talk with people and talk through their charts. So if you have a story that we didn't get to today, there may be another opportunity in the future. I'm also thinking about doing possibly some kind of like advice column type episode. I was watching another like podcast recently that they did like a call-in show for like advice, and I've been wondering if there wouldn't be a way to do that in a way that could be interesting, um, from an astrological perspective, where it's like an advice podcast type segment, but incorporating some astrology into it. So, if people would be interested in that, let me know, because I might see if I can put that together at some point, just because it might be an interesting way to try a new format that might be kind of fun and kind of interesting. Um, yeah, everybody says yeah in the comments. Okay, cool. Then I might think about that, and we might revisit that maybe as soon as next weekend, because I'm in the process of like workshopping what my next episode will be next weekend. And I also, yeah, I was trying to take a month off, not a month off, but a month to do some more like easier episodes, and a little break from doing the super intense research episodes. I've been on a like 3 month long kick of over the past few months. So something like that could be fun and light and like kind of enjoyable and entertaining. Yeah, my astro bender, Jenny says. I think that's a good way to call it. My astro bender over the past few months of intense like research episodes looking at hundreds and thousands of years of history. All right. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. Thanks for watching this episode of the podcast. Thanks to all the patrons that both shared stories today, and thanks to all the patrons that support this work and make this possible so I can do episodes like this and put them out there to the community so everyone can kind of learn from it and get a sense for how to read charts and how to um, draw on and like elicit some of the details, because that's part of what I try to do with these episodes, is demonstrate sometimes like how I would talk through somebody's chart with them and kind of draw out certain details that they may or may not be identifying already, but sometimes it helps even for other astrologers to have another astrologer there that's helping them to unwind and unpack some of the story of their own transits and birth charts, and just giving you a different perspective in that way. So that was a lot of fun. All right, I think that's it. So thanks everyone for watching or listening to this episode of the Astrology Podcast, and we'll see you again next time. If you're a fan of the podcast and you'd like to find a way to help support my research, then consider becoming a patron through my page on patreon.com. In exchange, you'll get access to subscriber benefits such as early access to new episodes, the ability to attend live recordings, the monthly Electional Astrology Podcast, an exclusive podcast series called the Secret Astrology Podcast that's only available to patrons, or you can even get your name listed in the credits. For more information, go to patreon.com/astrologypodcast. Special thanks to the patrons on my producers tier, including patrons Christy Moe, Ariana Amour, Mandy Ray, Angelique Nambo, Issa Sabah, Jeannie Marie Kaplan, Melissa Delano, Sunny Bazbaz, Kwatsi Alabarahu, Annie Newman, Ginger Sodlier, Berlin West, Nikki Crawford, and Vivi Henriette. People often ask me if I'm available for consultations, but unfortunately I'm not right now because the podcast takes up so much of my time. However, I did create a consultations page on the Astrology Podcast website that has a list of astrologers that I recommend for astrological consultations. You can find that at theastrologypodcast.com/consultations. The astrology software we use here on the podcast is called SolarFire for Windows, which is astrology software for the PC. You can get a 15% discount by using the promo code AP15 at the website alabe.com. For Mac users, I recommend the software AstroGold for Mac OS, which is astrology software for the Mac computer made by the creators of SolarFire for the PC. You can get a 15% discount with the promo code AstroPodcast15 through their website at astrogold.io. If you're really looking to deepen your studies of astrology, then I would recommend signing up for my Hellenistic Astrology course, which is an online course in ancient astrology where I take people from basic concepts up through intermediate and advanced techniques for reading birth charts. There's over 100 hours of video lectures, plus monthly webinars and Q&A sessions, and then at the end of the course you get a certificate of completion saying that you studied with me if you pass the final written test. Find out more information at theastrologyschool.com. Finally, shout out to our sponsor for this episode, which is the Northwest Astrological Conference, which is happening May 22nd through the 26th, 2025. Their in-person conference is sold out, but you can still register to get a virtual ticket where they're going to stream the conference simultaneously online in May, and you can register for that now through their website at norwac.net.